I think what surprised me the most is that it wasn't terrible. Spoiler alert, these are all spoilers. It's finally time to step into a new Star Trek series, Strange New Worlds, the culmination of Paramount's efforts to keep you subscribed to Paramount Plus. I mean, another batch of characters wearing different costumes for you to buy on Star Trek timelines. I swear I'll get you to 5 stars eventually, Pike. I swear I will do that. I mean, culmination of Gene Roddenberry's optimistic, utopian view of the future. The opening starts out with something very reminiscent of Star Trek Generations in the Nexus, where we learn that every Federation captain has to know how to horseback ride, and does a mean cast iron grill. In the background we have wind power, which, you know, it's kind of cool and futuristic, but they're already in the future, we don't need it to be more futuristic. In the future that they're in, wind power would be completely useless because of the amount of power that they're going to be consuming at that point. Wind would just be trivial.
Imagination is not necessary. We are presently generating 12.75 billion gigawatts per...
Like, are these things left over from the 20th and 21st century? Or did they, you know, just leave their dilithium at home that day? Or maybe they just think that they're pretty. It's a little weird, a little bit anachronistic. And so overall, although the opening is fine on its own, very well executed and dramatic, blah, 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 I'm getting a little bit tired of this new Trek era's obsession with everyone having a tortured past. At least we thought that they learned their lesson on this in the second season of Star Trek Picard. The first season, everyone was so tortured all the time, and then in the second season, we just get to have Picard be tortured the entire time, which, okay, sure. I'll talk about that more in a bit. And so we have to take Anson Mount's Pike and make him a tortured soul just so that we can make his character interesting because we have lazy writers. That's right, it is a hallmark of lazy writing that you just make a character a tortured soul in order to make them interesting. There are other ways of making characters interesting. Hence, the first several decades of Star Trek. Most of these characters were not tortured souls, and yet we still loved them and found them compelling. Speaking of making characters interesting, what is the obsession with modern Trek giving Spock love story arcs? Sure, it's fine. Maybe he kissed a girl or two back in the day. That being said, I will say that I am fine with how this was handled, unlike in the Kelvin universe where things were really out there with regards to Spock's love life. This one is actually canonical. We know that he was engaged to be married to this woman from the past. It's just that the original series didn't touch on that very much. And unfortunately, it looked like initially, and we don't know how this is going to play out yet, Pike's knowledge of his certain doom is actually going to very specifically overshadow the original vision of Roddenberry's Star Trek, and that is an optimistic future, as I mentioned before. All of a sudden he has a pessimistic future, and the whole reason that people loved Anson Mount's Pike is that he was a character filled with that optimistic hope that we wanted from the Federation, that we wanted from Star Trek. It's what separates Star Trek from Star Wars, one of the things. It's that we look towards a brighter future for humanity, and instead he's looking towards his own darker future. And I know that the episode is going to deal with that, and hopefully they will deal with that continuing and quickly. Then we jump into the episode, and what it immediately looks like is a classic Star Trek episode. Thankfully, we have discovered a strange new world. We have first contact. In many ways, this is a totally unsurprising episode. In many ways, it's something that we've seen before. But I feel like that was necessary. It is bridging the gap and hopefully reassuring fans that we are going in the direction that people have been waiting for and have been asking for years now. They briefly mentioned that the AI in the ship has been upgraded, and I think that we're going to touch on that again real soon, or possibly just be the culmination of events. Because as we know from Discovery, the writers and the showrunners, they wanted to push a future that was incredibly futuristic, and immediately people realized that this in no way matches the original series, so they added this MacGuffin that AIs take over and we've got a Battlestar Galactica-fy our technology. Although we haven't completely reached that point, they've pulled it back a bit, but they upgraded their AI, which means that there could still be more changes coming, which will get us all the way back to the cardboard and plastic and wood and rocks, Kirk's Constitution-class Enterprise. And I loved the addition of what appears to be the King Jr., Martin Luther King Jr. starship. Fantastic name for a starship. I'm going to touch on this a little bit later. Some people had an issue with that because they feel that modern Trek and new Trek has been taken over by wokeness. Alright, let's get into the complaints. I've read a lot of hot takes and a lot of reviews on this show. Let's touch on those. Number one, some people said there are too many females in the cast. People are trying to do this whole the future is female thing. Okay guys, Captain is a white cisgendered male. We've got Spock, a white cisgendered male. The Chief Medical Officer, a black, apparently cisgendered male. 3 of our main highest ranking officers are all just regular dudes. I think it's perfectly fine that we've got a few females on the bridge. It is in no way overweighted toward females because almost everyone in charge, except for number 1, is still a dude. Yeah, we've had female captains in the past, and people have focused on Discovery focusing too much on transgendered relationships. Again, I would like to remind everyone that Star Trek has always been progressive. Maybe you've become set in your ways, but at every step of the game, Star Trek has pushed the envelope towards social justice, towards, I dare say, wokeness. And just having a few extra females on the bridge, oh my goodness, if that's pushing your buttons, you better put down the remote and just go back to Fox News. What I will say is actually the problem that a lot of these people complaining about wokeness had with Discovery is not that there were all these transgendered or queer relationships, depending on what you want to call it. The problem was how they handled relationships in that show, in that they engaged extensively in tell, don't show. When, classically speaking, good writing is show, don't tell. So instead of having actually good, engaging relationships between characters, we just had people talking about their feelings for sometimes over half of the runtime of an episode would just be someone talking about their feelings on Discovery instead of acting on their feelings and doing things and showing and having engaging relationships. They just said things. Incredibly lazy writing, which drew attention to the fact that they were incredibly clumsy in the handling of the relationships in that show, whether it be romantic or professional. Speaking of which, another contrast, sharp contrast between Strange New Worlds, as of yet, and Discovery, is that we don't have constant conflicts between the officers on the starship. And this was another principal tenet of Roddenberry's Star Trek, is that the people on the ship, the associates, the co-workers, the crew, they don't have cause to fight with one another. The human race in Starfleet has largely, not entirely, but largely progressed beyond petty squabbles and emotional conflicts with one another. The emotional conflicts are because of the episode, the circumstances, the situations, and between the conflicting parties that we see in the show, instead of constant squabbling between the main characters, which thankfully we do not get in this much more classic take, again, on utopianism and optimistic future. Speaking of conflicts, getting back into that, most of the conflicts in this episode are not resolved with violence, whereas in Picard and Discovery, most of our conflicts end up in firefights and fist fights and starship battles and sky beams. Again, that's not how we generally solve most conflicts in Star Trek. The whole idea of Star Trek is that there are other ways out of situations, and we have discovered that as a species. Yes, sure, Kirk got into a lot of fisticuffs. We had lots of starship battles in The Next Generation, and especially the culmination of Deep Space Nine. But the ultimate culmination of Deep Space Nine was actually a story of relationships and the struggle between good and evil, and not just the battle in space. And Discovery and Picard often missed out on that. Instead, it was just a scramble to see who could have the biggest guns the fastest. And another thing that Discovery often got wrong is that the tension of the scarcity of resources is something that was also to be avoided in Star Trek. We create situations and drama in ways that are novel, in ways that are not traditional to television and movies. We see this a lot in the movies themselves, the motion pictures from Star Trek, because they're trying to appeal to a broader audience, but generally in the show, Starfleet does not have a want of resources. They're not lacking in things to get the job done. What they're lacking in is a decision of how to solve a problem, a moral choice. Now we see this in Voyager, but they set that up very specifically to be the case. We see that a little bit in Deep Space Nine. We're at the edge of Federation space. But in principal Federation voyages, we shouldn't be battling with the scarcity of resources constantly. And although the later seasons of Discovery largely improved, they actually built the entire show based around scarcity of resources and the dilithium problems. And again, it moves us further away from where Star Trek started. Now, of course, we have to have room to grow. I totally recognize that. We have to move forward. But there are certain things that we should keep and certain things that we can modify. And if you just change everything, it's just a TV show and it's not Star Trek anymore. And is this Star Trek? Yes, I think it is. Is this episode great? Not amazing. It's a tall drink of milk, just like Anson Mount. It is boring, it is nutritious, but it's fine. And I think that it's exactly what we needed to set up a new Star Trek series with some confidence. I know there are mixed reviews on this, but I would give this a solid 7.5 out of 10. I am very pleased. I see that there's room to grow. It totally lacks originality, but in a way that gives me great promise for the future. Am I putting too many eggs in this basket? Maybe. The first episode of Season 2 of Star Trek Picard looked good, and then it really went off the rails. Let me know what you thought about the first episode of Strange New Worlds down in the comments below. If enough people watch and like this video, maybe we'll be back for another one. Catch you later. And so, we have to take Anson Mike.